right. Thank you so much, Faith. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Sean Oakes. I use he, him pronouns, as Faith said. I'm in Northern California on the ancestral lands of the Southern Pomo peoples, and I'm loving seeing folks drop their hellos and locations into the chat. So hello to folks over in England and up in Canada and across the States here and other places. Welcome to you all. We will start with meditation. And in the spirit of welcoming, I want to start with a chant that I sometimes really love to do as a welcome that perhaps isn't done very often. And this is actually a welcome to the spirit beings of the land and the universe. In the Buddhist discourses and the stories, it's said that the spirit beings, called devas in Pali, the early language of the Buddha, the devas love the Dhamma. They love wholesome things. So they love the teachings of the Buddha. They love practitioners. They really love metta, loving kindness. So when you practice metta, they show up. When my wife and I had a baby, some nuns we know came over, and one of them said, "Oh, devas love babies. They're circling around." So this is a chant from the Thai forest tradition that invites the devas, the spirit beings, to come. And I particularly love chanting this because it helps me feel a connection to not just the intellectual or philosophical or even meditative parts of the Buddhist tradition, but actually the old animist underpinnings. The Buddhist tradition is full of instructions on how to relate in a wholesome and wise and mindful way to the land and the earth around us and the spirits that animate the land. And so this is actually a practice that you can take up to chant an invitation to them. I encourage you to take it seriously if that's your orientation, or to ignore it if that's your orientation. I do imagine / understand / sometimes feel that when I sing this, it really is an invitation to the spirit beings, and it's specifically an invitation to listen to the Dhamma. So it's often done before talks, for instance, and so I'm going to pull that chant up so that you can read the translation as well. I'm just going to chant the Pali and not speak the translation, or you can just begin meditation, and we'll go right into meditation from there. I'll give a little bit of instructions in the meditation, and then we'll have some time in silence. So you can begin by just taking really as comfortable and easeful a seat as you can for meditation, balancing the energies of wakefulness and relaxation or ease. And we'll invite our spirit friends to come and join us as we practice. Samanta Chakavalesu Atraga Chantu Devata Sadhammang Muni Rajasa Sunantu Sagamokadang Sage Kame Charupe Girisikaраtate Chantalike Vimane Diperate Chagame Taruanagahane Gehawatum Hikete Bhumma Chayantu Deva Jalatala Visame Yakha Gandhaba Naga Titanta Santikeyahang Muniwara Vachanang Sadao Me Sunantu Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Badanta Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Badanta Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Badanta. Gathering our attention into the field of the body. As we begin a meditation, we engage in this first directing of the quality of the heart-mind we call attention. We use metaphors like bring attention to the body, or come into the body, or be present, or come into the present moment. All of these are spatial and temporal metaphors that are pointing to the same activity, which is to direct the perceiving part of our mind to the world of sensation and feeling that's unfolding and can be perceived directly. When we bring attention to the body, we come into contact with sensation, and that could be through the pathway of any of the sense doors. So if your eyes are open, you might be aware of the space you're in, the light, the colors. You might be aware of where you are on the planet or in your ecosystem, where you are in relation to the valleys, the hills, the mountains, the water, what direction you're facing. Coming in through the doorway of hearing, becoming aware of where we are in the field of sounds. This is orienting in place. Sounds give us a sense of the space around us. So you might take a moment and listen. And let that bring you more into the here and now. Sounds appearing and disappearing moment to moment. If there's strong smells or tastes present, you might notice those, and they bring you into the body. Even to say into the body is a kind of metaphor, but attention can be directed to any of the bases of sensation. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And so the sense of the body in contact, pressure on the floor or cushion or chair, contact with clothing, temperature, texture, sensation on the skin, sensation inside the body. And of course, in all of these sense bases, some of it is pleasant, some unpleasant, much neutral. And often we use the anchor of the breathing. Directing attention sometimes is easy. You think of something like the breath or sensations or sounds, and you direct the attention there, and it stays there for a while. You hear sounds for a while without being distracted. You feel the body, the breath for a while. Other times, attention can be weak, or the pull of other content, mostly thought and feeling, story, or painful sensation, can be really strong. We point the attention somewhere and it jumps off. It doesn't really make contact. So this first moment of meditation is to direct attention to something that is in the here and now, so in the realm of sensation, and keep it there. Find some anchor. So take a moment and explore this placing of attention, either with breath or sensation or hearing, or maybe the visual field. Find somewhere that's as easy as possible in this moment to stay without feeling pulled away too much. And whatever you've chosen, stick with it now. And notice how much effort it takes to keep the attention there. Sometimes it'll be a lot, sometimes very, very little. Notice where on the spectrum of effort you are in this moment. If you're really tired or really busy or in an emotional drama, it'll be hard to keep the attention on something more neutral and present, like the breath or the body. If there's not too many pulling distractions, it may be easier. So you're dialing your effort to be in tune with the conditions you find yourself in. And the goal is to use as little effort as possible to stay with your chosen anchor in an undistracted way. If there's a lot of distraction, you'll need more effort. If there's not so much distraction, you can ease up. So these instructions are basic instructions in focus, sometimes called concentration, sometimes called samatha or calming, tranquility. You can use these same instructions if your preferred practice is open awareness. In that case, the anchor is awareness itself, or the perceiving quality. But the same thing is happening. We find how much attention is needed, how much effort is needed to sustain attention in an undistracted way. And so we'll sit in silence together in this way. If your practice is served by maintaining an anchor as your steady focus, then you'll find that you need to re-engage attention onto it every few seconds, probably. This is the process of connecting attention and sustaining it. And the task or the game is to sustain as long as possible, with as little effort as possible, and really drink in the sweet feeling of being undistracted. If your practice is more open awareness and you want to include the field of thought particularly, then your practice is to maintain the quality of being really conscious when there's thought. So undistracted, even if thought is happening, this is difficult. Thought is compelling and it pulls us away, and we can fall asleep a little bit. And we just listen to the story. You still want to choose when you're listening to a story and know that you're listening. It's the same process is here. Connect and sustain with awareness as the anchor. And don't lose it. Use as much effort as needed to know what's happening in an ongoing way. coming to the end of the meditation period. I'll close the sitting with the chant of the homage to the Buddha. There it is in the chat if you want to sing it along with me, if you're in a space where you can make sound. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So, staying with our theme of how we give our attention to things, give your attention to the transition from sitting or meditating in stillness into whatever this is coming next. Notice if your body wants to move a bit, give it that movement to stretch or work things out. Notice if your attention leaps out to the screen or in other ways starts to mobilize more quickly. And you can just notice that. Notice that there's a pull on attention. I'm pulling on your attention right now by talking at you and waving my arms around. This is how attention works. And so we will investigate today attention, and I'm maybe a little bit cheekily calling it your most expensive resource. A Dharma friend of mine on Facebook said, shouldn't you call it your most precious resource or valuable resource? And yes, totally. And I'm going to make a little argument for why it's quite expensive, actually, and high value things. Using a metaphor that we all understand, like it or not. So take a moment and do whatever the body needs to do to come into the space of listening to the Dhamma, and welcome to our spirit friends who might be here listening to the Dhamma. That chant that we began with, the invitation to the Devas, invites the deities of various natural features around us, rivers and lakes and mountains and valleys, also ones that reside in palaces in the sky, and specifically mentions the yakas, the sometimes mischievous or troublesome spirits. We're not inviting them to do anything else in relation to our lives, just to listen to the Dhamma. So they know that. But just to be clear, yakas, that's what you're being invited to do, is listen. The Gandhabas, which are the celestial musicians, sometimes called, sometimes these get translated sort of problematically or strangely into European terms. So occasionally you'll see, demon, goblin, fairy, for a kind of deva called kinnaras. But they're not exactly the same. I think Indian fairies aren't exactly the same as fairies in the UK and Northern Europe that you might be familiar with from the stories. So we'll just call them yakas, gandhabas, and nagas, which can translate to dragon, but at the very least they are wholesome, often very sincere Dharma practitioner spirits that come in the form of the bodies of snakes. They are shapeshifters. They can change into human form. So welcome to all of them as well. All right. So attention is your most expensive resource. We use the metaphor of money commonly, at least in English, often to talk about attention. When someone says, pay attention, they want you to give them a thing that is a kind of currency. money, in a strange way, is a great metaphor for attention because um, you have a limited amount of it, and you have to choose how you spend it each day. Uh, it's somewhat tied to time. So you could say, oh, I'm going to be awake for 16 hours today, or whatever you're awake for. There's a way that it's true that every minute you spend attending to something, you're not spending that minute attending to something else. But it's also true that as attention moves between objects and bases of attention, it changes how we perceive time. If you're attending to something that you really love, or you're deeply absorbed in doing something, if you're in a state of flow, you're deep in creativity, or you're deep in meditation, time can fly by. We can say, oh, I just spent the whole afternoon reading this book, or writing this poem, or meditating, or walking in the woods, and I barely even noticed. And so attention that's immersed in something can stretch time out. When attention is not wisely regulated, if you're not engaged in something you are interested in, or if you're engaged in something, if your attention is pulled around, like you're bored and you don't know what to do with yourself and you don't know where to place your attention, time can crawl, and that can happen in meditation too. You're just like, you're really not there's a lot of distraction, there's a lot of stuff in your field, and you open your eyes and you're like, 5 minutes, it's only been 5 minutes. Other times the opposite. So attention and time are related, but time is stretchy. What's the teacher that said time is a wibble wobble sort of thing? I think that's a Doctor Who quote. Time is stretchy, and it scrunches and it expands. But we have this action called attention. And how we use it is at the heart of practice. The Buddha would say in many different ways that the way we use attention is one of the most important aspects of our practice. There's a discourse where he says, there's one way that things can go wrong, and that's through misuse of attention. There's one way that things can go well, can go right, and that's appropriate use of attention. In other discourses, he says that it was through appropriate attention that he awoke, that he found liberation, that he discovered the noble truths, for instance. So what is this thing we're calling attention? In terms of how our neurobiology, our perceptual system works, I think a simple way to talk about attention is that it's a kind of conscious perception. So perception is the quality that engages with the objects of the senses and recognizes them, right? I see you, I recognize faces. I hear voices, I recognize my family in the distance. There's perception going on, so information is coming in through the senses, and there's a kind of recognition or an understanding. I know what that is. There's a label that comes with that. So perception in Pali, I'm not going to heavy on you the Pali words today, but I'll give you a few for those who are interested in that sort of thing. The Pali word for perception is sanya. It's the third of the aggregates. So perception is happening all the time. And we can perceive things either consciously or unconsciously, right? And we could say we notice or we ignore, or we notice or we miss or we ignore. Stuff that you ignore, you can still perceive it, right? I'm not paying attention to the sounds of my family in the background, but I can hear them. And if the sounds changed, if somebody, if I heard a big crash and then someone started crying, or wailing, my attention would turn there. My attention would be pulled there. And so attention is one of those things that is part of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic means it happens by itself. And like breathing, and interestingly connected with breathing, it happens by itself, but you can also consciously direct it. And there's a few things in our system that are like this. Breath is one of them. Fortunately, you don't have to do anything to keep breathing. You don't have to try to breathe. But you can stop your breathing or lengthen it or shorten it intentionally if you want to. And then as soon as you stop paying attention to it, it goes back to doing its own thing. Attention is the same way. If we go back to our money metaphor, let's say every day you wake up with a certain amount of attention. It's not like you wake up with a certain amount of time. It's a little bit like every moment in time, attention goes somewhere if you're awake. And we could say, and when you're asleep, in terms of, we could talk about dreaming, lucid dreaming, but let's stick with wakefulness for now, the waking state. Attention is going somewhere all the time. You're perceiving something, and something is in the foreground of your awareness at all times. Sometimes it gets really diffuse, but there's always going to be something that's in the foreground. And that something can be chosen by you or not chosen by you. So when you're distracted, like I'm trying to stay with the breath, but my mind is wandering away to something else, I'm not choosing that wander, right? My mind is wandering away to the chicken coop I'm building, and I'm thinking about some problem with the wire or the wood or whatever, right? I'm distracted. I'm not choosing that distraction, but it's in the foreground of attention. So attention is there. When I notice it with mindfulness, I can bring attention back to the breath. And now I'm intentionally paying attention to the breath. So attention is always active when you're awake, but it moves on a spectrum that I'm going to call volition. You can place it somewhere. It takes effort to keep it there sometimes. Other times it just stays where you put it. Isn't that lovely? Wish that would happen more often, right? Attention. So why do we get distracted? Attention is connected to our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, and it's connected particularly to our threat detection system. All right, this is the system that engages what's called sympathetic activation. Sometimes fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are used for some of the pathways into sympathetic activation. It engages, gets activated when it perceives danger, so that we could fight or run away or manipulate the social field in a way. That's fight, flight, and fawn, ways to stay safe in a dangerous setting. Or it could turn on the super deep survival mechanism called freeze, where we get very, very quiet and shut down. There's a lot of activation in freeze, but externally it gets kind of cold and shut down as a way to survive life-threatening circumstances. It's a different talk to talk about how all those systems get hijacked by trauma, but it relates to this talk because distraction can be thought of as an error in the sympathetic nervous system. My attention is pulled away, right? Even to this benign thing like, oh, I'm distracted, I'm thinking about the chicken coop I'm building. Some part of my being, my body-mind complex here, suddenly had the thought about that, and there's a little energy there. And what there is that there's more charge or energy, more emotional energy, more content energy, more interest there than there is here with the breath. And what we know from this, what we can see in this, and you can see it in whatever your favorite distractions are, favorite, not favorite, but the ones that happen a lot, is that attention goes where there's the most charge. So if you're having a difficult time with a friend or a partner or a child or something at work, if there's a drama in your life that has some emotional charge to it, it's going to be hard to pull attention away from that, because somehow your system is saying there's danger there. Attend there. Look over there. You don't meditate, while in your car on the freeway. I hope you don't anyway, particularly if you're driving, because there's danger out there. You don't want to pull your attention away from traffic, right, to attend to your breath. It's not the right time. But when I'm meditating, it is the right time to attend to my breath, but still there goes my mind. Oh, this thing she said, this thing he did, this thing happening at work. I'm perceiving danger in some way, but I also could just be perceiving interest. Like the breath is kind of boring sometimes, right? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm sort of working on this poem, let's say. I'm writing a song. Okay, I'm writing a song, and I get a burst of creative energy, right? It's not all protective. There's also beautiful creative energies. Oh, the song, I should do this with the bridge. I should move to this chord, this verse. There's more charge or more emotional interest in the song than there is in the breath. And so attention follows energy, follows charge. It follows intensity, really, is the word. Attention follows intensity. Part of our struggle, practice, effort needed in meditation is actually to get over the hump, and it can be a long one, like decades, of figuring out how to make the body and breath, the senses in this moment, and just simple, quiet presence interesting enough to stay with. So that we're not constantly spending our whole meditation dealing with the dramas that are not happening here and now. I actually have to get interested in the breath, interested in the body. When you're further on in meditation, and there is a further on, right? It's not all the same thing forever. When you're further on, which really means more concentration, largely, the experience of the present moment in the body and breath can get really interesting. It can get really energetic. There can be cool, blissful sensations. There can be stuff with lights. All the symptoms don't matter. The thing that matters is that calm and centeredness becomes interesting, right? And the most interesting thing about calm is that it's great. I'm like, what is it? It's the bliss that you have forgotten how to stay in contact with. And this is, concentration is considered to be a source of wholesome, non-dangerous pleasure for this reason, that when the body-mind is calm and centered, not distracted, there's actually a marvelous kind of pleasure that comes from that. And the very simple first layers of that pleasure is just that it's really nice to be not upset. And distraction very often, because it goes to emotional charge, is really that being upset is more interesting than being calm. And so how do we learn how to enjoy being not upset? Thich Nhat Hanh is beautiful in talking about this. He talks about an instruction in the discourses on mindfulness that says you should be mindful of the presence of a hindrance, but you should also be mindful of the absence of a hindrance. So he says, when you have a toothache, everyone, you have a toothache when you have a toothache, but do you ever notice when you don't have a toothache and how marvelous that is? Right? And so, when you become undistracted, when you come back in meditation to the breath or the body, whatever is your anchor, notice it might be subtle at first, but notice the delicious feeling of not being engaged in that drama, right? This is a very tiny little renunciation. Let go of the drama just by coming back to the breath or the body, presence. And then actually notice how good it feels. And you can take that a really long way. Right? So, attention is conscious perception. You're perceiving something, you bring it into the foreground. And I want to just point to a range of ways that this appears in practice. And for those of you who like diagrams, I'm going to bring up a diagram. I'm not going to talk deeply about this, but I'm going to give you a link to more on this that you can look up, a talk where I go into this diagram a little bit more in depth. But I want to emphasize this piece about how if you don't consciously direct your attention, it will be directed for you. And this is why it's an expensive resource. Because if you spend an hour distracted, or lost in something, you never get that hour back. And when you direct attention, you can direct it to things that are very easeful, spacious, effortless. And please learn to do that. It's always beneficial to direct attention. Even if what you're directing it to is to being wide open and released and spacious. It's still better than being distracted, right? And when it's time to process your old traumas, it's better to do it intentionally. To say, now it's time to engage with that and to bring up the old fear or the old anxiety and feel it in the body and let the energy move through in a safe and titrated way. All of this stuff from, somatics and trauma practice. Lots more to say about that. But it's more helpful to do that in a moment when you're choosing it than to, be in the grocery store and, suddenly get triggered by something and then feel like you have to process that thing right there. One of the skills that we are generating here is to be able to choose our battles, to choose where we direct the attention and when, so that when something comes up and there's upset, which totally happens, you use mindfulness to notice that it's upset, and then you can assess, is this a good moment to feel this feeling fully, to just go, really feel it and be with it? Or is this a good moment actually to say, not now, I'm in the grocery store, or whatever you're doing, not now, I'm meditating, right? This is a very good meditation instruction, to just say, later. The thought comes up of the chicken coop, and I say, later. Thought comes up of the difficult conversation I'm having with my person, later, right? It's not helpful to let the hindrances drive the bus. You drive. And then the hindrances are actually what arises based on past conditions. And you can choose when to engage with the energies of difficulty or not. So a little diagram on the difference between some different kinds of attention. And so this is a little map that I'm calling 4 modes of attention. And it's just a way of talking about what we find in the Buddha's discourses around how we pay attention. So the x-axis, the horizontal, is volition. So on the left is undirected attention. So I'm not making a lot of effort to point my attention at one thing. It's more undirected. And then over on the right is more directed attention. I'm more concentrated, more focused. The y-axis, the vertical, is awareness or consciousness. At the bottom is I'm really unaware, dreamless sleep, spirit possession. Really, I don't know what's going on. And all the way at the top is highly aware. I'm really, lots of mindfulness, lots of attention. And so what we see here is that there are kinds of attention that are conscious but undirected, conscious but directed, unconscious and undirected, unconscious and directed. Generally, the most wholesome ones, the ones we want to be in most of the time, are high awareness. So you want to be on the top side of this diagram. On the unconscious side, there are some things that are not terribly harmful and some things that are more harmful. So when you're less conscious and the mind is not directed, it's really wandering, you get things like daydreaming, relatively benign, the mind wandering distraction. But deeper into charge, you get anxiety, vigilance, overwhelm. These are the trauma states. Deeper than that, you get things like sleep dreaming and then dreamless sleep, very unconscious, very undirected. When you're unconscious and the mind is directed, this was a strange quadrant to fill out. I was like, what is that? You're unconscious, but something is directing your attention. And I was like, oh, this is where habits and being on autopilot lives. And then if there's somebody else directing your attention, this is where it gets nefarious. This is where you're like under hypnosis, or you're under the influence of like systemic conditioning, like, racism, biases, ideologies. Your mind is being controlled by an outside force. And the deep, literal version of that is spirit possession. So our practice is to make things more conscious, to become more aware. So more mindfulness, more awareness. So on the top side of this thing is the conscious aspects of this. And so on the undirected side, this is like, I'm aware, but I'm not trying to concentrate. I'm not trying to focus on one thing. I'm keeping a more open awareness. So this has things in it like lucid dreaming. I'm aware, but I'm not directing the dream. It has like improvisational flow states. I'm really following the flow. And it has practices like open awareness or like pure vipassana, where I'm noting, let's say, all the senses. I'm not trying to be undistracted. I'm not trying to not think, but I'm trying to notice thinking, feeling, all the things as they're happening. And on the very undirected side of that, and this, the top of the map here, you have like witness practices, pure mindfulness. When you add a little bit more volition to it, so you go to the right along the axis, you get to effort. The Pali term is vayama, samma vayama, right effort. So you get to like gatekeeper consciousness. This is where mindfulness is noticing things, and it allows some things in and some things doesn't. So I don't want to get distracted by a long storyline, right? Anytime I make the effort to be undistracted or to come back, I'm moving to the right on this volition axis. And then over in the upper right, you get the practices that I think are most emphasized in the Buddhist tradition, which are the conscious directed states. Analysis and problem solving, structured flow states, immersion states like jhana, deep meditation. And the primary tasks here are the concentration factors, the jhana factors of connecting and sustaining. So there's not just mindfulness, but there's really the effort to choose where your attention is going moment to moment. And so much of our work in practice is to bring things into awareness and then to be volitional about where on the volition axis we are. Am I doing an open awareness practice or really a focused concentration kind of practice? Volitional attention is called in the texts by a beautiful term that is sometimes called appropriate attention. The translator Bhikkhu Sujato calls it rational application of mind, which I don't love. I like appropriate attention or proper attention. The Pali term is yoniso manasikara, which is a mouthful. I'll break it down a little bit here in our last few minutes, and then we'll go to some discussion. Yoniso is a beautiful word. It's rooted in the term yoni, which refers both to the womb in the female body and more metaphorically to the heart of things or the origin, not unsurprisingly. The womb is the origin of things. But in this context, it also means like appropriate or right, or like gets to the bottom of it, or gets to the heart of the matter. I like gets to the heart of the matter. So yoniso gets to the heart of things. And then manasikara. Manas is mind, like the thinking mind. And kara is like kama. Kara is like action, like karma or kama. So I'm going to give you the spelling of the word and then some discourses for further study. There's your further study list. You can copy that and paste it somewhere else for later. But there's the word at the top, appropriate attention or yoniso manasikara. Appropriate attention is attention that is shaped in such a way that we can get to the heart of things. And in a very simple way, the thing that is inappropriate attention or unwholesome attention, what's called ayoniso manasikara, wrong attention in a way, if you want to use language like that, attention that does not get to the heart of things is distraction. So why would distraction, main way we get it wrong, or the main way we miss the heart of things, that we miss, and directed attention? I think part of this comes back to this way that attention weaves into time. when we say that we're going to be in the present moment, what does that really mean? Right? Often, what it means is that we're directing attention to something that we can immediately perceive. Right? It's going to be coming through one of the sense doors: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling. Right? So thinking and feeling is happening in the present. Thoughts are happening in the present. Emotions are happening in the present. The thing that is not happening in the present is whatever the thoughts and feelings are pointing toward. So when I'm thinking about a difficult conversation I had last week, that conversation is in the past. The activity of thinking about it is in the present, and you can be mindful of that. But story is so deeply compelling. It has so much charge, right? Remember, back to attention follows intensity. It has so much charge that the content, the idea of the past, it pulls us away. And because you can't do anything about the past, you can't fix it, right? You can process the emotions, and which is going to happen in the present. You can come into forgiveness, which is going to happen in the present. But you can't change what you said or what they said or what you did. It is therefore, to paraphrase the Buddha, useless to think about. It's not appropriate. It doesn't help you at all in the process of liberation. It helps if it's the right time to process emotions, right? If you have to work out what you feel now that's still sticky about what happened in the past, and there's a moment for that story to come out. This is a kind of therapy sort of moment with a good friend or a therapist or your journal, but it's intentional, right? You're doing it on purpose in a bounded space. Now we will think about the past. Same with the future. Mostly the things you think about in the future, they will never exactly happen that way. Therefore, you're thinking in fiction. Therefore, it's useless. Again, that's a short paraphrase of the Buddha. Not useful. There's a moment for wise planning, and again, it's not during meditation. It's when it's appropriate to plan. And so appropriate attention is really just the opposite of distraction. And there's essentially no place on the path for distraction to be wholesome. There's no reason to be lost in story. There's a reason sometimes to process, but there's no reason to be lost. It does nothing for you. And so you are spending your valuable hour that you will never get back on doing something that does absolutely nothing for you. And so what I want you to come out with from this discussion, what I hope this is getting toward in my calling attention an expensive resource, is that it's profoundly precious. And so to not take it lightly, I think, is really the heart of this. That how we direct attention, including how we consciously engage with story, or how we consciously engage with our life as a thing that flows from past through present to future, how we engage with narrative. How you do that consciously has so much to do with how free you will feel, right? Because the definition of not being free is that you can't control your attention. Liberation comes when you can direct your attention and it sees clearly what you directed at. When the Buddha became liberated, he said, when my mind was thus clarified, malleable, workable, I directed it to the knowledge of past lives. Right? I directed it to the arising and passing of beings based on their karma, based on their actions. He directed his attention. And so our task here then is to practice in every moment of the day, really, as much as you can remember it, to direct your attention to what is most wholesome in the moment, whether that's being present with your kid or doing your task or meditating, and to do so with the minimum amount of strain. It actually doesn't take much effort to direct your attention, and it's more painful to be distracted. So feel the pain of distraction, direct attention, feel the pleasure of presence and calm, and from there, right? Both mindfulness and tranquility grow. And you begin to spend your most expensive resource in a way that that will just bring more and more benefit, more and more well-being, less suffering. All right, we'll pause there. Thanks for listening. Thank you, as we often say at the end of a talk, for your kind attention. And so we'll shift now into discussion, reflections, questions, clarification. So you can raise your little electronic hands or wave wildly into the camera, and I'll call on you and you can unmute. Lorraine, please. So.
Sorry, I'm on my phone.
There you go.
Thank you, Sean. So potent, so important every moment, so important, so valuable, so precious, so expensive. In the present moment, I've had this theory of if time is a stretched out gift of one or a few lessons or things to go through in a life, well, maybe that's all life is. But so with that question in mind, waking up, that you feel so aware of what is deleterious distraction, whether it's processing struggle or dramas or traumas, and you're aware of it, and saying, and you're really wanting and really intending to be in the present moment and in the body, and then like an hour and a half goes by, it's like, yeah, again. How about when you're aware of it? Do you think that it's okay to process it even if it's first thing in the morning, or you're just really in trouble and find a way to get through it and direct your attention properly?
It's a great question. There's a discernment that we each have to do that will tell us what kind of practice is appropriate for this moment. So like, yeah, sometimes I'll sit down to meditation and it's really clear that there's something emotional in the field that needs to be processed. If that's the case, it might actually be more helpful not to try to focus on the breath, but actually to, do something that would process those emotions more. So for me, that might be, I go for a walk and I think about it, or I lay down and I breathe and I try to find it in my body and let that energy move. There's lots of practices to do, right? You want to have a toolbox that has concentration practices in it, that has awareness practices, that has emotional processing practices in it, that have relational practices, so that you can tell that if something really needs to be processed, that you have a time and a space for it. And maybe that it's like this for a lot of people, maybe emotional processing is best done relationally. So you're like, well, I'm not going to do it right now at 5 a.m. on my cushion, but at 9 o'clock, I'm going to call my friend. And I'm going to be like, hey, I'm really worked up about this thing. Can you be a mirror for me, in this moment? Or you save it for therapy, or you take it to your journal. But you want to know what's the right practice for the state you're in. And sometimes it's going to be appropriate to say, not now. I'll deal with that messy conversation later, because right now I'm breathing, baby. So, discernment. Thank you. I think Tina's hand came up next. It's hard to see. There's a little flurry there. We'll go in order.
Well, thank you so much for your talk. I remember before I became a meditator, I lived in my mind and there was a constant story going. And I was fortunate because at one point it just stopped completely. And then I realized, oh my gosh, there's like a different world here that maybe if I wasn't thinking, I could experience. And I think that sometimes where I do become frustrated or still triggered is when I am working with people who really believe the narrative that they have created And the narrative that is constantly going in our society, whether it's on television or whether it's on their cell phone or whatever it is. And so I think that what I need more practice with is just remembering that the narrative has its time and place. And I guess that my only thing to say about the monetary talk is that right now a lot of people are very stressed out about money. And I think epigenetically, your genes trigger a reaction. And I think that anxiety about money is really difficult.
For sure.
So that would be my only sort of concurrence with your friend who talks about preciousness.
Totally. No, I'm with that. It's definitely precious. I wanted to startle people a little bit because I've been told a lot of times, to be present. And sometimes when it's hard to be present, what I can notice is that I don't really want to be. Like I'm not always the most diligent, sincere meditator. Sometimes I'm like, I don't care, because not wanting to be present is actually a symptom of distraction. Like distraction is very sneaky, right? This is Mara. Mara says don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's all fine. It's not, right? That's Mara's the deceiver. For those who don't know Mara is the personification of distraction and deception in the Buddha's world. So, and Mara is also a deva. So Mara is present, always listening to the Dhamma. So hi, Mara. The thing to do with Mara is to see them for what they are. And so, yes. So that is why I chose the money metaphor. And I don't know that I want to say that we should be more anxious about our attention, but many of us live in cultures that I think we should be more protective of it. That the minute you turn on your screen or walk out of your house, in some cases, if you live in the city particularly, a bunch of people with agendas are gonna really pull hard on your attention, right? They're paying for you to click on things and to see ads and do stuff. And so, before, you just watched the most marvelous, compelling, wholesome movie on Netflix, and before the credits are even 10 seconds in, the next movie that is going to start playing automatically is already coming up, and they know that, right? So nefarious actors are actually trying to pick your pocket all the time. And so, guard your wealth.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Joanne, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes. Thank you. I had put in the chat earlier about diverting attention and effort from the second arrow.
Yeah.
So while you're in the situation, you're being reactivated. It's not the skillful time to respond. But at some point after, you're wholesomely processing it, and then you kind of have it clear, and then it happens. And somehow the other party doesn't seem to feel like that was skillful at all, what you did.
Sure.
I mean, cognitively, I get what you say, but emotionally, I think it's quite difficult if it goes around each time.
It is quite difficult. That's absolutely true. And, someone else mentioned other people. So, not to unnecessarily quote Sartre, but, hell is other people. We could say in Buddhist language, dukkha, other people, are a cause of dukkha. So it's one thing to say, like, I'm training my attention to be wholesome and appropriate and, take things in the right time. And, that's all well and good. And then you go downstairs and, somebody's like, hey, why didn't you? Or why did you? And, and you were like, I was wholesomely directing my attention. And they're like, yeah, whatever for that, why didn't you? Why did you? And so, of course, like relationship is where it all gets worked out in a way, in a certain way. Like solitude is easy, it's people that are challenging. And because that's where, again, if attention follows intensity, attention gets pulled to whatever people are saying. You might think like, I totally did my best and I'm clear, and someone's like, that was not, someone's like, I'm upset, essentially. And so attention is going to go there. And in the social field, attention still follows intensity. So in a group process, the most upset person pulls the focus of the whole group and drives the whole process, right? The loudest person, the longest talker, sometimes the most privileged, sometimes the most traumatized, sometimes both, right? The attention of a group is also going to follow intensity. And so for us as practitioners, I think there's, you don't always get to choose, what you want to do moment to moment. Like, oh, I don't want to attend to this right now, I'm doing something else. Somebody is demanding something. And so then you say, okay, I'm going to choose. You do have the choice to, to respond. You have the choice to follow the precepts, but probably you're going to say, okay, the wholesome thing to do is to attend here, to bring attention here. And, and to stay as, as fully engaged in the heart of my practice when I'm working with people as I can. So just to, to keep the precepts in mind, to try to speak in a way that's wholesome, truthful and non-harsh, to be generous if I can, to try to be clear, and then also to have some equanimity, to not take it personally, right? You can't save other people, you can't practice for them, you can't be present for them. All you can be is present, and you can choose what people you hang out with. When you have that choice. Sometimes you don't have that choice. You're at work or you're wherever you are. But the Buddha will say in many places, one of the most conducive things to a mind that can attend in a wholesome way is, having wise friends, hanging out with wise people, not hanging out with fools. Like, to be blunt, and the discourses are blunt. And so, all of that is going to be part of, put yourself in conditions or circumstances when you can, that are going to make tranquility, concentration, wise attention more possible.
Right. I also put in the chat how you tell your story is how you live your life. But I think often after things recur, your instinct is then, to sort of somehow defend yourself against, the barrage of whatever is coming at you.
Yeah. And, sometimes defending is going to be helpful, right? And sometimes not necessary or not needed. But the feeling of needing to defend, right, is an intensity arising in the present. It's an emotional energy. And so, like all the other intense emotional energies, the practice will be to notice it, to name it, to label it, to understand it if you can. Like, oh, I'm feeling defensive. What's up with that? Oh, I'm afraid of being blamed. I'm worried that I actually did wrong. Like, wherever your attention goes with that. And again, maybe it needs process, and maybe it doesn't actually. Like, maybe it's really somebody else's thing and you can let it go. Maybe there is something really for you to do. Like, oh, I should really give some attention to this. And then, and then you return to it, bring it back up.
Thank you.
Blessings. Victoria, good to see you here. Welcome.
Yeah, hi, Sean. Good to see you too, and thank you for that beautiful talk. It's definitely a high priority topic for me. I'm actually kind of shifting here in the sense that I've I know, you know, because I know you well from your courses and everything. And I know your background, your biography, as it were. And I was just intrigued with the beginning of the session today, with the talking about the different spirits and the you know, the in terms of, I love the lore of well, also Hindu tradition, Buddhist tradition, I mean, all of those, because I feel like the lore of every culture is so rich and so evocative, and it provides clues to how people regard, you know, our life and what, you know, what our values are. But by at the same time, it's hard for me to put myself into a devotional state. So
Yes.
I'm just so I don't want to like take us totally off topic here, but it just I mean, I love chanting with you, and I was chanting very enthusiastically with my
Great.
my microphone off. But I was just wondering what you see as like the scope in terms of that. Like is it because some people even have said to me, well, you know, even to get engaged in things like that is a kind of cultural appropriation, unless you've like converted to like, for example, Tibetan Buddhism or something like that. And I feel like that's a little bit too strict, but some people get very offended. They think, you know, if you're not, you know, religious, then you shouldn't. So anyway, I just wonder what you thought about that in terms
Sure.
of like the range. Obviously, we're all free to choose what works for us, but I'd love more of maybe a kind of philosophical, your kind of philosophical take on that.
Sure. Sure. It's a big topic. To speak to it in brief, you know, a couple things to think about. First of all, again, on the theme of other people, like other people may be upset about any number of things, and they are not your concern. Other people can draw attention to something that you might be doing wrong, and so it's always good to ask yourself, like, is this person bringing attention to something that I should bring attention to? Because, you know, maybe they're better at noticing your faults than you are, and so are, you know, to be respected. But we don't need to believe someone else's narrative out of hand. You know, so what someone else, lots of people call all sorts of things appropriation, and I think what's most important is really two things: is the intention through which we're doing it, so how our own heart is, and how we are related to the actual culture that we are engaging with. And so let's say intention is one thing and lineage is the second. So I think the critics who are discussing cultural appropriation are onto something. They're really pointing to some of the worst aspects of the post-colonial world, and some terrible things that privileged folks in the global north tend to do, you know, as a symptom of privilege, which is its own kind of trauma. I value having a strong and sincere engagement with the culture that I'm referencing, and so I don't engage in like Buddhist culture or Hindu culture or indigenous cultures ever with irony or sarcasm, for instance. I don't make costumes, I don't pretend, I don't play with things, I don't put things on because they're interesting. If I'm going to invite the devas, I want to do it in a way that is as resonant as I possibly can with how that chant is actually used in its source culture. So they're inviting real devas, I'm inviting real devas. I want to pronounce it correctly. I want to learn it. I want to memorize it. I want to hang out with monks that chant it. I want to have a relationship with that monastic tradition. I want to visit the place if I can, or study it deeply. You know, the thing that I think the thing that makes something not appropriation is that you're engaging with it fully and sincerely. It's not a costume, and it's not casual. Because there is a power differential in the world around the cultures that that engaged in the colonial process and the cultures that were dominated by the cultural process, by the colonial process, right? This is all about the fallout of the British Empire and the Spanish Empire, essentially, right? The Dutch Empire in Indonesia, the great Western European colonial empires. If you're a member or an ancestral member of the Northern European colonial club, be really careful around how you engage with the cultures that were colonized, the indigenous and global South cultures particularly. And I think that that's be really intentional and have a connection to the lineage. You know, if you're really drawn to devotional practice, bhakti practice, you want to chant to Krishna, find a lineage that chants to Krishna and learn some of their chants and learn some of their rules. You know, don't go to kirtan dressed inappropriately. Like so much of it is like, be a good friend, be a good friend, and be humble. And, you know, maybe don't teach it until you've spent a lot of years doing it, and maybe you even have some permission in the lineage to teach it. That kind of thing. And then people still complain. That's, you know, you've done the best you can. And I'm not trying to throw up my hands and say, like, you know, complainers gonna complain, but I don't think it's helpful actually to generate a rule that everyone has to stay in a particular cultural lane that is going to mean narrowing the sense of it's actually going to mean strengthening boundaries, right? That there's actually, that borders are somehow cosmically relevant, even though most of them were only invented in the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were Greek monks in the Buddha's Sangha within a couple hundred years of his death. Like, there were Europeans in Buddhist robes. It's not that far away, right? You can believe in reincarnation and someone can be like, is that cultural appropriation? And you can be like, yeah, Plato believed in reincarnation. And that's my cultural tradition. I'm European, you know? And don't worry about conversion. Like, convert is what I'm saying. Like, convert can have traumatic baggage from the Christian world, but you know, at a certain point, I was around Zen and insight meditation people who were like, you know, don't become a Buddhist, just become a Buddha. And it's at a certain point I was like, this is the most important stream of wisdom and culture and community in my entire life. And as far as I can see, is the best thing in the world. Of course I'm converting. Why would I not convert? I love this stuff. This is gold, right? Take refuge and mean it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, and so yeah. So really, it's just like, I think, be real. Just be real about it, and I think we're all right.
Beautiful, very eloquent. Well, you just opened Pandora's box, but I see we're out of time. So I hope to talk to you again soon.
You always open Pandora's box at the end, but you know where to find me, so we can keep talking about this.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. And to everybody, we'll close with a short dedication of merit. And before I say that, I will say, in echo of what Faith said at the beginning of the gathering, say thank you for your presence and your participation and your kind attention, and for your generosity in supporting Sangha Live, supporting my teaching, supporting all the teachers that come here to teach. The ancient tradition of dana, which is giving, is the foundation of letting go. It's the foundation of wise community. It's the foundation of the Dhamma itself, being able to thrive in an anti-capitalist way, in resistance to how warped the priorities of the cultures we live in can be around what is truly valuable. And so thank you for anything you can offer to support this lovely organization and myself. And I'll offer the merit. May our practice be for our own well-being and liberation. And may it be for the well-being and liberation of all of those we know, all of those we don't know, all beings in all time and space. May beings encounter the Dhamma, encounter the liberating force of the teachings and the person of the Buddha, the persons of the Sangha, and may our very practice be a prayer for well-being. May the Devas be well, and may you each be protected by the Devas wherever you go, and protected by the power of the Triple Gem. May all beings be well. All right, thank you so much. Lovely to be here. Thanks to Sangha Live for the invitation. You can find me through my website. I have a Tuesday evening sitting group and other things happening. Sutta study monthly on Fridays, reading the long discourses of the Buddha, stuff like that. I'll see you again soon. Take care.